TV. And our special guest is former Congressman Patrick Murphy from Bucks County, the Philadelphia area. Good to be with you, Congressman.
Hey, John, great to be back with you as well.
Let me ask you, sir, you wear many hats, but one that you're wearing at the moment is as co-chair of VoteSafe here in Pennsylvania. What exactly is VoteSafe?
John, VoteSafe is a nonpartisan or even bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans, true Americans coming together to let our 12 million Americans, Pennsylvanians, know it is safe and secure to vote by mail this November. So whether you want to go to the polls or whether you want to do it via mail, it's incredibly important to exercise your constitutional right to let your voice be heard.
You know, Congressman, some might think this was a partisan issue because President Trump has expressed so many concerns about voting by mail. Are his concerns unfounded?
Unfortunately, are. Listen, I'm a proud Iraq War veteran. And ever since the Civil War, our American troops have voted by mail. When I was in Iraq, I voted by mail. When I was deployed to Bosnia, I voted by mail. Last year, when I ran the Army back in 2016, there were 600,000 of our troops overseas and civilians that voted by mail. This is something we've done since the Civil War. We need to encourage all Americans and all Pennsylvanians to let their voice be heard and to vote by mail. I will tell you, I serve on the Cyber Commission. We all know from the Mueller report and others that there are Russian influencers trying to dissuade our fellow Americans from being part of the political process. We cannot let them chip away at our democracy here at home. We need to let our voices, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, let your voice be heard and be part of the process.
Well, as you know, Congressman, there were some concerns in the Pennsylvania primary over the, I guess, the application process, the mailing out of ballots, the receipt of ballots, and the very slow count, particularly at your end of the state. Did we learn any lessons out of that primary that you hope we can apply to make sure that voting by mail, in fact, voting in general, is safe and secure on November 3rd?
No doubt, John. We need to make sure that we improve the process every single time. And listen, we're going through a global pandemic. COVID is nothing to joke about. COVID is serious. It has killed 140,000 Americans. Over 3.5 million have been infected. But the reality of it is this: voting by mail is safe and secure. And we need to make sure that we allow every American that ability to let their voice be heard and be heard in the ballot box. And whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, that's why I'm so proud to stand with my fellow combat veteran and Governor Tom Ridge and people like former Majority Leader Dave Reed to stand up and say, we don't care what political party you are. Be part of the solution. Be part of this process of our Constitution, of our country, to vote who you think is best able to lead our nation and our state.
You know, a lot of people still prefer to vote in person. And part of the problem in the primary was that we had a number of counties, not all, but a number of counties restricted the number of voting places. They cut back on your neighborhood polling place. That does not sound like a way to really spread the enfranchisement, although I recognize that during a pandemic, there were some issues getting enough poll workers. How do you think this is going to work in the fall?
Yeah, John, I know when I was deployed overseas, I voted by mail, like most American soldiers who were deployed overseas, but because you have to. But I know this last cycle, this last primary, I did vote in person. I wore a mask. I showed up. And it has been cut back because most of our poll workers, both Democratic and Republican volunteers, they're volunteers. Many of them are seniors. Many of them didn't feel safe. And that's why we need a more robust effort with mail-in voting. Last cycle, last 2018, the midterms, 1 in 4 Americans voted by mail. That was over 31 million Americans. Voting by mail is safe and secure. Now, I'm old school. I will still probably vote in person. But I want to encourage all Pennsylvanians and all Americans. It's okay and it is safe and secure to vote by mail. But you got to be part of the process. Don't let foreign actors like Russia intervene in our democracy here at home. We can't let that happen. And that's why I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with Tom Ridge, with 5 living of our former Pennsylvania governors, and Senate Majority Leader, former Majority Leader Dave Reed, a fellow great American.
In the end, then, Congressman, are you comfortable that we're going to have a fair and secure election for president on November 3rd?
I am comfortable, John. And listen, I always like you, I can't wait to see what the poll results are that night. And it might take a little bit longer. It might take days. It might take a couple weeks. But the reality of it is our democracy is too important not to get it right. And we're going to get it right by allowing Americans and our fellow Pennsylvanians to vote by mail or to vote in person, whatever is most convenient to them. But regardless of what choice they make, it will be safe and it will be secure. But we cannot allow these nefarious foreign actors to dissuade us from being part of the process. We need to let our voices be heard in the ballot box, whether you're for President Trump, against him, whether you're for your local congressman, against him or her. The reality of it is this: let your voice be heard. Be an American and exercise your constitutional right.
Well, former Congressman Patrick Murphy from the Philadelphia area and the former U.S. Secretary of the U.S. Army. Great to be with you, sir. Thank you very much for being part of this today.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the great work that you do.
And our special guest today is Governor Tom Ridge, former governor of Pennsylvania, former Secretary of Homeland Security, former just about everything. Congressman.
You can't hold a job.
I wouldn't quite say that, Governor. You just hold a lot of jobs because you're good at them. Thank you so much, sir, for being with me today. I really appreciate this.
You're welcome, John. Nice to be with you. Thank you.
So I want to ask you about a new hat that you're wearing. You are now the national chair of a project called VoteSafe, along with former Governor Granholm of Michigan, I believe.
Right.
The two of you are co-chairing, a Republican and a Democrat. VoteSafe. What exactly is VoteSafe?
Well, VoteSafe is a bipartisan effort, an advocacy opportunity for both Jennifer and yours truly to encourage federal and state and local officials to provide safe and secure voting options in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. To that extent, that is in-person balloting opportunities as well as absentee ballot opportunities. And so we've joined hands together, and I really respect Jennifer a great deal, always have and always will. Once a gov, always a gov, and that's a certain fraternity or sorority. But since the states have the responsibility to oversee these elections, we just want to make sure that the public understands that we're together, bipartisan. Let's have, in the midst of COVID-19, make sure the in-person balloting stations are safe and secure, but let's not ignore the reality, the unprecedented reality, that there'll be a lot more absentee ballots on November 3rd this year than ever before. So let's make sure both are available to our constituents.
Well, let me start by asking about in-person voting at the voting polls, because we went through an experience here in Pennsylvania, as you may well know, on a postponed primary election on June 2nd, where in some counties, including large ones like Allegheny, there was a huge consolidation of polling places, making it very difficult for people to get to their neighborhood polling places. And I know there are issues regarding the number of poll workers and the like and the safety, but it was I think it raises some questions, and I'm asking you if you think it does, when we make it harder for people to vote in their neighborhoods.
Well, I think the first option should be, and I'm convinced that the governor and I believe in this, the local officials, Republican or Democrats, regardless of where they are in Pennsylvania, will do everything and should do everything they can to maximize the number of in-person capabilities and facilities. That should be priority. That should be a priority. But concurrent with that, it's equally important because there'll be some people who don't want to wait in line or concerns about their health writ large. They ought to spend the same effort on making sure that the absentee ballot option is available to them. And that's why Jennifer and I are saying to the state and local officials, do both. And frankly, we wrote to all 50 secretaries of state and said, if you need additional resources in order to do it, you ought to talk to your senators and congressmen. And hopefully, as I understand today, the administration is meeting with I think, the House and the Senate leaders. If there's going to be a fourth package of financial support to the local communities, it ought to include additional dollars to help them provide both of these options.
Well, as you know, Governor, in Pennsylvania, we now have no excuse voting by mail. Anybody can vote by mail. But if I understand correctly, that's not the case throughout the country. Can you give us some sense of what's happening nationally on this?
I think more and more states are going to the vote by mail regime. That is, if you're registered, you're going to get a ballot, then it's up to you to use it. Other states still require an application and an explanation. I think the trend will be moving both Republican and Democrat states to, we'll send it out and you choose whether or not you're going to use it. But I remind folks that there are still local penalties and safeguards so that the process is not abused, even though there does appear to be some controversy emanating from the White House that somehow there'll be this massive fraud associated, particularly with vote by mail, because there are states that have been using it for years and years, probably longer than the president has been president, and the kind of abuses that he's talking about have not been realized in those states. And you got to trust your state and local officials to make sure that that there is no abuse. And if the president's worried about the abuse, then give them the resources they need in order to ensure that that it's utilized properly. Period.
So I take it then that you do not share President Trump's worry about massive fraud and vote stealing as a result of mail-in ballots.
That's an understatement. I think it's one, there's no historical antecedent. I think it's gross hyperbole, gross exaggeration on his part. It somehow reflects in my mind that when you start sowing the seeds of doubt into the election itself, whether you're already worried about an outcome, I'd rather not think that, but I would say to the president, if you're worried about fraud, then make sure that your administration works with the state and local officials and provides the support they need to guarantee that there is no fraud, rather than prejudging, particularly in light of the fact that the kind of fraud he's talking about has never occurred in the past.
Are there some steps that you believe states ought to take that will protect and secure and really guarantee the safety of mail-in ballots?
Well, I think states pretty well do that. You know, I was talking to, and Mark Holman is a Pittsburgh guy living now. He's been with me for a gazillion years, probably longer than he was, but he votes in Virginia. And when he signed his absentee ballot on the envelope, they said, here are the civil penalties, here are the criminal penalties. Make sure you don't abuse your right to vote. And I think there are plenty of laws on the books and plenty of ways to enforce those laws in the unlikely event of fraudulent use. By the way, the Heritage Foundation, well-known Republican conservative organization, took a look at 250 million absentee ballots cast over the past 20 years. And I think they found there were like 200 plus cases of fraud that resulted in civil and criminal penalties. So again, is it a perfect system? No, not absolutely perfect, but experts on both sides of the aisle say it can be safe and secure. And if you're worried about it, Mr. President, just give them additional resources to continue to preserve the integrity of the ballot.
Finally, Governor, on this topic, obviously the security of voting ought to apply to the security of vote counting, because nothing's more important than making sure we have a safe method and a secure method of counting ballots. In Pennsylvania, this last election, we had huge delays in getting final vote counts, and that's true across the country, as I understand it, in some states. Philadelphia took more than 2 weeks to get a final vote count. That is not acceptable in a presidential election in particular, it would seem to me. But what are your views on that, and what can we do about it?
Well, I think there's a couple of matters that I'd like to share with you and your viewers in the audience. First of all, there was unprecedented use of absentee ballots in Pennsylvania. I think historically 5 or 6%. Now we're in the primary was 50%, number one. And so we should not anticipate any kind of diminution in the number. I think a lot of people in COVID-19 are going to use the absentee. By the way, I don't think there's an inherent political advantage to either party or to any candidate by absentee ballots or vote-in-mail ballots. The advantage goes to the candidate or the party that encourages people to use them, their supporters to use them. I know the Republican chairman observed that the Democrats have done a good job of promoting absentee ballots, and he said, hey, we need to be as smart as the Democrats. If we're going to use absentee ballots, let's make sure all our supporters do that. The other thing that I would recommend, the other change, not only in Pennsylvania, but around the country, is one, a change in mindset. It may not be election night, it may be election week, but you can expedite the process if you allow the locals to begin counting the absentee ballots before 7 p.m. on election night. So let's accelerate the count. Let's get the changes necessary in the legislators. Ideally, it would be nice if it was uniform. But also, let's remind ourselves we have from November 3rd until January 20th, either the president or the vice president are going to, maybe they'll win by a landslide, who knows? But in the event that absentee ballots will make a difference, let's think of it in terms of election week. And more importantly, I'd say to my fellow citizens, it's better that we get it right than to do it quick. And with all due respect to KDK and all the networks, hey, if you can't announce, your computer models show who's the winner that night because you don't know what the absentee ballots are going, you're just going to have to wait like the rest of us.
Touche, Governor Rich, touche. Bottom line on this, though, are you confident that we will have a fair, square election this November?
I'm confident that the men and women, Republicans and Democrats, at the local level, who volunteer their time in this exercise of self-government, will do everything within their power, and they have the laws with them and the resources they need to ensure that we have a safe and secure election. They've been doing it since the Civil War. They'll continue to do it. And I also think that both parties should be encouraging maximum participation. You know, one of the thoughts that I would share with everyone is only about 6 out of 10 Americans registered to vote voted in 2016. And so when people complain to me about, they've got some point of view about the election, I ask them, well, did you vote? And when they say no, I say, well, let's talk about the weather because you don't have any skin in the game. So let's vote. And whether it's in person or absentee, I think Pennsylvania makes sure that the ballots are counted properly and the election is safe and secure.
Governor, let me ask you a couple other questions, if I may. You, sir, have served as governor of Pennsylvania, elected 2 terms as governor. You know what it's like to be in that office when there are emergencies that occur. How do you think the state of Pennsylvania and Governor Wolf are handling the COVID-19 pandemic in our state?
Well, I think it's been important that the governor be out front of this. And while I haven't watched all his press conferences, I understand that he's out on a regular basis. And I'm not going to say whether or not I agree down the line with everything he's done, because I think every governor would look back at any other governor and say, certain things I might have done differently. And I think certainly in this case, there are certain things I might have done differently. But I appreciate his availability publicly. And I appreciate particularly his emphasis on some of the basics. And the one thing that I give him resounding support around is that whole notion, look, we all have an individual responsibility to ourselves, our family, and our fellow citizens. Wear the face mask, wear the face mask. And frankly, CDC says you really want to contribute as a citizen. It's the cleanliness, washing the hands, don't touch the face mask, face mask, face mask. And I appreciate the fact that he keeps reiterating that over and over. Sadly, not everybody complies, but I certainly embrace that strong advocacy in that area.
Do you think that the approach to reopening Pennsylvania, which is had to be somewhat scaled back. Do you think the governor has had the right approach on that issue?
Well, I think the governor's tried to take a surgical approach depending on the counties, because the decisions should be driven not only by science, but on data. I think one area where I would probably have a conversation with the governor, I think a lot of these small businesses, and we rely heavily on restaurant businesses and small businesses, but allowing a 50% capacity based on data in an individual county might be a preferred approach, and hopefully in the days and weeks ahead, he might reconsider that. But I think the fact that he's been upfront, he's tried to be surgical in his approach, tried to have data drive it, I think that speaks to what he's tried to do, and I think you have to give him the credit for trying to do it the right way.
As you know, there's always tension between the governor and the state legislature. I'm sure there was plenty in your day as well.
Oh, they all love me.
Not, yeah, right. So here's the question, Governor. As you know, the Republicans who control the state House and the state Senate, they have been fighting tooth and nail with the governor over his right to declare emergencies in a disaster in Pennsylvania, which gives him certain executive authority. They have gone to court. They've not won in court, but they've gone to court over this. And now they've passed a constitutional amendment. It has to pass another session, but essentially would strip the governor of the declaration of disasters after, I believe it's 30 days. The legislature would have the right to stop it. What's your view of that? I mean, in terms of the authority of a governor to act, regardless of party, what is your view of how a governor should be able to act in emergency situations?
Well, personally, I would probably side on the point of view to preserve the governor's authority to act in times of emergency. I would also regret that this impasse may or may not have been caused by the either inability, unwillingness, or failure to maybe over the past couple of years create a more collaborative structure between the governor and the state legislature. So I'm not convinced that this isn't not just a response to this particular incident, but maybe some other internal disagreements over the past couple of years, and I certainly regret that. But I would lean toward preserving while recognizing the importance of the legislature. I lean toward preserving the governor's prerogative in this, and in most instances that I can think of.
And then, Governor, finally, last round of questions. You were this nation's first Secretary of Homeland Security, some would say the best, under under President Bush in his term. And, there's a lot of talk about DHS these days because the Department of Homeland Security has acknowledged that they actually have forces in Portland, Oregon. Some would say that Homeland Security was designed to protect us against terrorists, and most would think from abroad, although working sometimes with Americans as well. Is this the appropriate role of the Department of Homeland Security to be in cities like Portland?
Well, John, you've asked obviously a very relevant, topical, and controversial question, but you've been doing that all your life, so that's the way it goes. I have two perspectives on that, and they kind of merge. The first is the first Secretary of Homeland Security. You identified the role and the mission and the purpose, and that is to protect and defend the country against the ever-present and ever-changing global terrorism challenges that we have and will continue to face. So I understand that. From my point of view, it wasn't designed to become the president's personal militia, and so that is somewhat troubling. From the perspective as a governor, I would be interested in finding ways to work with, again, it's my approach, work with the federal government. If there's an issue of lawlessness and violence and drug gangs and the like in any city in Pennsylvania, in any community in Pennsylvania, we would be most effective if we harness the capability of the federal government and my state police and the good men and women at local law enforcement. You're so much more effective working together like we do on the joint terrorism task forces. But I would say this: it'd be a cold day in hell before I would consent or agree to, the unsolicited, uninvited intervention in any of my cities. So I would like to think that going forward, the president might think of reaching out in a more collaborative fashion, because we have strength in numbers, and unified, we could probably accomplish more than him acting independently. And I certainly don't favor that kind of action, and certainly don't think DHS was designed for that purpose to start with.
So if the president came to you as Secretary of Homeland Security and said, send forces to Portland or to any other city in America, you would tell him?
Well, that's a really tough question, but one of the people I admire greatly in the history of American politics is Eliot Richardson, who was asked to do something that he wasn't comfortable doing and actually felt it might be unconstitutional. If I recall, he resigned. I'm not sure that's what I'd do, but certainly under the circumstances, I would be very troubled by it. I'm not sure what my action would be, but I'd have to think about, I'm a military guy, I like to follow orders, but this is a tough one for me to accept as an individual, let alone as governor and former secretary of DHS.
Well, Governor Tom Ridge, it's always a pleasure to be with you, sir. Thank you so much for spending so much time with me today. I really appreciate it.
John, great pleasure to be with you. I hope you and the family and your audience all do well. Don't forget, face masks, wash your hands, and we'll get through this, but we'll only get through it if we act in concert together. So best wishes to you and all.
Thank you again, Governor. Appreciate it. Former House Majority Leader Dave Reed, a former representative from Indiana, Pennsylvania. Representative Reed, good to be with you, sir. Thank you.
John, very nice to be with you today.
So I'm going to ask you, Dave, you've got a new hat. I know you're retired from the legislature, but you are now serving as the Pennsylvania co-chair of VoteSafe. What exactly is VoteSafe?
I am. I'm excited to be part of VoteSafe. And really, the principles are just very simple. 2020 is a very interesting year, to say the least. And it happens to coincide with a presidential election cycle and a lot of state races and congressional races as well. And Project VoteSafe wants to make sure that folks feel comfortable participating in this year's election. And that can be done by two different mechanisms, a safe and secure mail-in ballot system, and number two, a safe place for folks to go and vote in person at their local precincts.
Well, let me ask you about first voting in person, because we saw in this primary in Pennsylvania, some of the counties, not all, but some of the counties really reduced the number of neighborhood polling places, making it difficult to vote nearby. Now, I realize that there was a special state law that allowed that just for the primary because of the pandemic. But do you think it's important for in-person voting to have neighborhood polling places?
I do. I think folks need to have as many options as possible. And just given the concerns of this year, and who knows what the world is going to look like in November, we need to have the safe and secure mail-in balloting options. But we also need to have the local neighborhood precincts for folks to be able to be comfortable going to as well. We don't want to disenfranchise any voter by making them travel too far or get into an environment that they're uncomfortable in just from a health and safety perspective. So hopefully a lot of counties have learned a lot from the spring primary, and with a little bit of assistance from the state and ideally from the federal government, we'll be able to have a smoother process here in November. Although I would point out a lot of counties did a fabulous job, adapting in the spring primary. There's a couple counties out there that could probably use some improvement here into the fall. Hopefully everybody's able to work together and make that happen.
From your perspective, though, as long as there's an alternative to voting in person, which there now is, thanks to the legislature and the governor, every Pennsylvanian can now vote by mail. Are there concerns? Do you have concerns or worries about how that process operates?
I think anytime you have anything that is perceived to be new, there's always going to be a transition. There's always going to be concerns that are going to be out there. But in reality, we've had a mail-in ballot system for decades in Pennsylvania through absentee ballots. and our military personnel have taken advantage of it for quite some time. Our seniors in particular, folks just traveling for work or pleasure, have been able to take advantage of that system because there were really very few restrictions on who could participate in the absentee ballot system. So I think the key will be just making sure with an increase in the number of ballots that we do an effective job of counting them correctly and accurately, and folks have confidence in those results, because I think that's really the key and one of the key fundamental tenets to Project VoteSafe. We want to make sure everybody's able to participate, and after the elections in November, nobody's calling into question the election results because they feel like they had the opportunity to vote and that those votes were counted accurately for all to see.
So what exactly is VoteSafe offering to voters in Pennsylvania? I believe you have a pretty interesting website with lots of links.
We do.
Is that part of what you're doing? Is it just informational? What exactly is it?
You know, I think it is a get out the vote effort in a nonpartisan fashion to make sure and to communicate effectively to our voters that these opportunities are out there. If they're not able or not comfortable getting to an in-person voting precinct, that the mail-in ballot procedures have changed in Pennsylvania and can be used effectively and securely. And then number two, you know, we want to be advocates on behalf of voters to the state government, to the federal government, to provide the resources necessary to make sure in-person balloting can happen as well. You know, there's going to be some increased resources probably needed to make sure the health and safety is protected at those sites. And I think the counties could probably use a little bit of extra help. So we want to be advocates both for local government and for our voters.
One of the concerns that we saw develop during the primary election was that some counties, and I'm looking at Philadelphia and some of their neighboring counties, took weeks to get a final vote count. Other counties, the smaller ones, did a little better. Allegheny County had the results in by Wednesday afternoon. People don't want to wait to know who the next president is. Are you concerned about the vote count, and are there things that VoteSafe cares about when it comes to the counting?
You know, I think there are a number of counties that it seems like every other election cycle seem to have some concerns come out of those counties, and this spring was no different. You didn't see the counties who've traditionally performed very well have a whole lot of problems with the system. So I think our goal is to see if we can get this to run a little bit smoother. And I think you're absolutely right. People don't want to be sitting the second week of December waiting to see who the next president of the United States is going to be. And I mean, you look at 2016, Pennsylvania was very vital to the actual result of the national election. And I don't think the entire country wants to be waiting either. So folks have had at the county level, at the state level, it'll be, you know, 5 or 6 months in between the spring primary and the fall general election. You know, it's incumbent upon folks to improve that process where it didn't run as smoothly as possible. And, you know, let's make sure we get the ballots in. Let's get them counted accurately. Let's make people feel safe and secure about that process. And let's get the results so that we know what direction we're going to be headed over the next 4 years.
Finally, Dave Reed, can you tell us, are you optimistic that we are going to have a safe and secure election in Pennsylvania where all voters can participate one way or the other?
You know, I am very optimistic. You know, we've had a number of troubling times in our democracy over the centuries, and we've always persevered. We've always moved forward. We've always figured out a way to work through the election and accept the results afterwards. And I think the key to this year, we don't want anybody from any political party or non-affiliated voter to feel like they could not participate and feel like the election was not as fair as it could possibly be. So we want to get folks out. We want to make them feel comfortable in voting in whichever manner they are most comfortable doing so. Let's get those ballots in, let's get them counted, and let's figure out what direction we're going to head as a country, a state, and local counties over the next couple of years.
That would suggest then that you don't agree with President Trump, who seems to be very worried that mail-in ballots lead to fraud.
I think conceptually, Folks have expressed a great deal of support for mail-in ballots. You look at the absentee ballot program, you look at the expanded opportunities that were passed by a Republican General Assembly and a Democratic governor, in a bipartisan fashion. I think certainly there are very legitimate concerns that might be out there on how you technically operate that system. And that's why they did the test run in the primary. And we've got 5-6 months in between to make sure that we get it right in the fall, because the stakes are just so high from all different perspectives. The world's going to be watching, the country's going to be watching how we do this in Pennsylvania. And I think we just want to make sure from Project VoteSafe's perspective that it's done in the best manner possible with the utmost integrity, and at the end of the day, nobody questions the results because of the process and the transparency involved with it.
Well, former State House Majority Leader Dave Reed, thank you, sir, very much for being with me today. I really appreciate it. It was good to see you again.
John, thanks for having me.
Just because the weekend starts doesn't mean our commitment to excellence stops. Wake up to KDKA TV News Saturday and Sunday morning for overnight and breaking news.